The biggest update to Warcry has finally arrived after almost 2 years, and we're going to look at the whole thing. Welcome to War Games on Toast, all of you lovely people. It's me, it's Toast. How are you this wonderful, maybe not actually Wednesday? It's official. As of May the 9th or something, Warcry has received its first ever real substantial update. This is a ginormous update that adds everything from rules additions to rules updates to points adjustments to whole new models added to the game. This is like a Tome of Champions almost. It is a humongous thing that comes in with meta watch stuff as well. It's incredible, and yeah, we're going to look at the whole thing, but first we are going to do a little bit of shilling.
What? No!
So before we go any further, please consider leaving a like, a comment and subscribing, as that helps me fight against that dastardly YouTube algorithmic demon. And if you want to help in a more tangible way, then please consider signing up to my Patreon or my YouTube members, like all of these wonderful people on screen now. But without further ado, let's get on with the show.
Groovy.
So there are 17 pages to go through here. Not all of it's brand new. I will only go over the brand new stuff, and this is going to be a very unscripted look at Warcry's update. So there might be a bit of repetition, a bit of rambling, but a whole lot of passion as well. So let's have a good old look at this stuff right now. So it's a little bit of commentary here. The core rule says that reactions are things a fighter can do during an enemy fighter's activation. Does this timing apply to all reactions? The answer is yes. This is actually ginormous. So there's been a lot of contention within the wider Warcry community as to whether or not you can react to reactions, because the rules were a little bit ambiguous the more you read into the reaction rule. I've always been in the camp of you can only react to enemy reactions, but again, because of the ambiguous nature, it was never really a surefire thing. It is now. That's been clarified, and that's a wonderful change, because it just means that you won't be getting those questions of, oh, can my cruel boys react to your reacting to me moving towards you? That kind of nonsense. You can't. Simple as that. So that's wonderful. Now we get to some of the bigger changes. These are all about the warbands of Gur. So that's like a little change. These are the big stuff. So Hunters of Hawanshi and the Wiltako Hunters have had a clarification of their slippery and smart step backwards rule. So now it reads, a fighter can make this reaction after they've been allocated the total damage points by a melee attack action. That's a big change. So prior to this, it could be argued you took 1 point of damage and then moved back because of the weird wording and how Warcry describes damage. This is incorrect, and it's been confirmed here to have been incorrect. And the wording definitely helps clarify that for new players and irons out all that nonsense. Sadly, Face Me Cowards has had a change. So prior to this update, Face Me Cowards could have been argued to have lasted the entire game once played, simply because it had no ending clause. It now has an ending clause right at the start and is until the end of the battle round. This is really sad to see, not because the ability is bad, but because Questor Soulsworn and the Duelist in particular were already very underused, and this was a wonderful bit of utility that helped them secure objective games a bit easier, and now it's super expensive to pull off the same tricks. It's still powerful, but it's a noticeable nerf, and I can see the Questor Soulsworn and the Duelist taking a bit of a hit. The Duelist in particular, who's seen a resurgence in use purely because of this ability being quite powerful prior, but now it's been nerfed. We will likely see the Duelist fall off, and that's quite sad to see, because the Questor aren't that great. They're good, they're okay, they're fine, but competitively they needed a bit of help, and this really does shaft them when they were starting to gain some ground again, which is sad. Next up we have the Soor Up ability. Now I was very, very vocal about this in my video, in my short, and also on Discord, and in private chats on how this works, and basically the argument was, could you make multiple groups? And I was firmly in the camp of no, because of how the rule was worded. Other people were in the camp of you can make multiple groups, which skyrocketed the damage to ludicrous levels. And now Games Workshop are saying no. And that's really it. You make one group, and that's a wonderful change. Again, that's ambiguity thrown out the window. It is now set in stone. No mental gymnastics required. I am all for this. And of course, this ability was always good, and it continues to be good. So that's fantastic. Arguably, one of the biggest changes comes with this one little thing here. This designer commentary on slippery and smart step backwards. So, can a fighter make those reactions if they are not within 1 inch of an enemy fighter? And the answer is no, which is a huge change to how people have been playing this since inception. It's been, for a long time, assumed and argued you could do this as long as it was a melee attack action. You didn't have to be engaged to disengage. This is completely wrong and not intended at all. So arguably, people have been running these factions wrong for the past year and a bit. Wilder Core a bit less, which is crazy to think about. And this also indirectly confirms that you can't. The Cabbage Knights for the Fleshy Courts, the Morbeg Knights, have an ability as well that allows them to disengage and then move. And there's a few that let you do this. And you could also argue, can you disengage without being engaged in that instance? And because of how people played the Wilder Core ability, you could absolutely argue, yes, you could do that, and that's been shut down as well. This is a very small change with massive ramifications, not just for slippery and smart step backwards. Again, this clarifying rules, taking out ambiguity, and removing the mental gymnastics to play Warcry, because there was always a degree of that doesn't really make sense to people disengaging if they weren't engaged. It's a massive nerf, don't get us wrong, it's a huge nerf to how those factions are played, but it makes more sense within the context of the game. And that's it for this, just some random Grand Alliance stuff which doesn't really matter. We now go on to one of the bigger changes in just this whole update is the addition of new dudes. And there's a lot of them. We're going to try and rapid fire through them, starting with the Grimhold Exile. So 5424 with a toughness 5, 20 wounds, and 165 points. This guy is really kind of solid for that stat line. He's obviously a chaff blender, and he falls in line with the likes of the Flameseeker's Thane and the Doomseeker, who are both cheaper, granted, for very similar profiles. What this Grimhold Exile gets, though, is the Lodge Fire Blaze triple, which allows him to basically roll 6 dice, pick an enemy within 3 inches, and roll 6 dice. For every 4+, do 1 damage. That's awful. However, if that fighter has 30 wounds or more as a characteristic, you hit on a 3+ instead and allocate 1 to 3 damage based on the value of the triple itself. And this is much, much better. As in, you're averaging 12, maybe 15 damage with a high end of triple on big, bulky wound things. This sounds fantastic on paper, but what we will soon see is that there are a lot of things added in this update that dodge this ability specifically. And that might actually have a massive effect on whether or not the Grimhold Exile sees play at all, because previously, maybe, this guy's pretty good. Is an interesting tech piece who gets 5 to 10 attacks off against a Fomroid Crusher and then pops a flat 15 damage or so onto that Crusher, which is a massive chunk of damage, right? That's pretty funky. But we'll see how that pans out when we get a bit further in the update. The Caradon Overlords have been shafted something rotten with this change though. Fight for profit. Until the end of the battle round, you add 1 to the attack's characteristic of melee attack actions. Oh no. So this first half is a huge nerf. It used to benefit both melee and ranged attacks. It's now just melee attacks. And also, it's also changed the second half of if this fighter is carrying a treasure or within 3 of an objective, add 1 to all attacks characteristics instead. That used to be +2. So it's a lot less effective on all their range stuff, substantially so. It's actually almost completely unplayable in Reaper or any dedicated kill mission with no objectives, right? So, whoo, Fight for Profit, while still quite powerful, because it is one of the only abilities in the game that does buff ranged attacks, has been reduced in its efficacy by a substantial amount. Now, it does have some knock-on effects that are somewhat positive. One, it's good for the health of the game. It allows Games Workshop to add in ranged units without having to necessarily worry about Cavalry overloads breaking them. Like, for example, Quiet Pock plus Cavalry overloads, he goes from 2 shots to potentially 4 shots. With Pock's profile, double tapping for 8 shots is kind of disgusting. Same as the Arbalista. Even the Slan, there's a whole bunch of things that love to be buffed by Fight for Profit prior, and it wasn't fun to play against. This helps rein that in while still making it okay, which is all that's good for the game, right? Shooting is very oppressive. It can easily become very oppressive in Warcry because there's very few counters to it due to the terrain rules being very light. There's very few cover-based mechanics in Warcry, unlike, say, the Kill Team. So this is a positive change in that regard. It also indirectly helps melee-based Caradon and pushes this new archetype for them more, because Fight for Profit is pretty good as a triple on melee things, because they don't need to be next to ranged objectives to gain the benefit. So those pikemen and the Endrin harnesses and all this other stuff actually become disproportionately better because you're encouraged to use them over range stuff almost, which is an interesting design stance. Overall, I'm actually very happy with this change. It's a very drastic change with more changes to Caradon later on as well, which very aggressively target them. But I think this is actually a healthy change to the game because Caradon have been so oppressive in the competitive scene because they're so effective. So this is a good change. They do get a bone in the code right though, which is a new model. His stats are fine. His price is also kind of fine. What you take him for is his ability called I Think You'll Find. And basically, enemy fighters can't use abilities or reactions until your next activation or until the end of the battle round, whichever comes first. This is very, very powerful, potentially on a double. It's global, there's no range, it's global. So if you're outnumbered by your opponents, you're against a horde and you've got a pretty small warband, you can now use this as your last thing you do, and then all of their abilities turn off. So obviously the obvious counter is to use all your abilities early. And this often does happen, but there's also instances where you want to hold onto your dice for key moments in the battle round where the code right can really read your opponent and go, you can't use that just when you want to, which is kind of cool. There's a lot of play with this, and do I think it'll be played? Despite that, maybe, I hope so. It's a very interesting ability, and I hope Caradon Overlords players don't just abandon ship and run away. I hope they look at the code right and go, you know what? We've taken some hits, we've got a bloody nose. This guy though could have some play, and then they find something to do with it, because I think it's a very interesting ability that's very much unlike anything else we've seen so far. Now the Seraphon have been given a huge update, as in they've got just a ridiculous number of things to go over. And the only change to their actual compendium is they lose Croc's Ago, which is interesting because they're gaining things that are very much adjacent to things already in the compendium. For example, Agron riders are very much like Saurus Cold One riders, but they're both in the book. The spawn of Chotek is very similar to a salamander, but it doesn't replace it, which is very strange. And I'm okay with that. Croc's Ago are gone, but they've been replaced with Croc's Ago, so that's kind of fine. So looking at all these very quickly, I'm a big fan of Cavalry, big burly Cavalry, because it allows you to have a fast moving thing that can get onto objectives or into deployment zones and tie up chaff and just lock things down. They become a distraction Khan effects, which is why I really like the Agron Lancer Alpha with Celestite Club. He has a nice wound pool, decent toughness, 4-4-3-4 is a wonderful profile, and he's not too expensive for what he brings, which is just speed and a nice bulky platform to operate from. The Alpha with Spear is also good. The range 2 is quite nice, but you lose some damage potential. And the base Agrodons, I think, are a lot cheaper, but I think losing out on the attack and the wounds just makes it so you're going to struggle to perform both elements of what I like to bring them in for, which is kill chaff and lock down things. The lower wound count means you die faster, and the lower attacks means you aren't killing chaff as reliably. And I think they're two big hits to the stats, which I think will maybe make them less usable, or at least I find them less attractive because of that. On the flip side, Raptidons, I am all for, and I very much like the base Raptidons and not the alphas, because all the Raptidon alphas get is one attack on one of the guys and plus 2 wounds, and these guys are terrible in combat. They're abysmal, so you wouldn't use them in combat. You would use them for their massive speed. Now, they are mounted, which is a big deal, because mounted is bad. They are slowed by terrain, they can't do all kinds of things, but movement 10's fast, and 110 or 120 points is very, very good. So these guys are fantastic for being launched onto objectives for a low price to tie up objectives, contest things, make it harder for your opponent to hold objectives, or just take treasure, right? They don't do much damage in terms of range damage or melee damage, but they're not really there for that. So they're more of a pack-based inclusion, really. So based on what the pack you're running in, Raptidons could be very, very interesting. Now, despite liking the Lancer alphas, I am not a massive fan of the Scar veteran on Agron, simply because he is a lot more expensive than your basic Lancer alpha, and he isn't that much better. Sure, he gains +1 strength, sure he gains +5 wounds, and sure he gains +1 crit. Those are all wonderful additions. But for 50 points more, I find it very hard to justify that price hike when there's other things in this price bracket that would do what he does, in my opinion, slightly better. For example, I would prefer an Achillean King who is about the same price point. I would prefer a Neve Black Talon who is about the same price point. And these things are either faster or arguably better in combat. So he's a little bit too expensive for my liking, although he isn't bad. I can see him play. Now, the spawn of Chotek, though, I don't like at all. I think his range attack is interesting, but nowhere near good enough, and he's quite expensive, although he is around about the price you'd expect to pay for an archer, maybe. Like a fairly elite archer, potentially, and the strength 5's nice. But that 2-3 damage and only 2 shots at that is a little bit low. You can make him fire multiple times with a skink handler, but I'm not too impressed by the spawn of Chotek. On the flip side, I am a big fan of Croc. These guys are incredible. We'll go on to abilities in a second because these are also actually pretty spicy. But Croc are incredible. 200 points, toughness 5, 28 wounds. Importantly, dodges the Grimhold Exile. Range 2, which is wonderful. 2 attacks, strength 6, 4-8 damage is fantastic. That's very close to being like a Fomeroid Crusher stat line for a massive discount. Throw on 30 points for +1 attack, and the Croc becomes 230 and very, very potent. A fantastic beater. Big fan. Now, the War Spawned is actually my preferred variant because same defensive line, less strength, less damage, but more attacks for only 5 points more. Now, I like this guy a lot because you don't necessarily even need to bless him because he already has 3 attacks. So he's cheaper than the blessed Croxigo and still does a reasonable amount of damage. Now, what really separates them is their abilities. So the base Croxigo gets Brutal Blows, which is a fighter can only do this ability if they're within 1 inch of 2 or more enemy fighters. You add up to 3 attacks to your melee attack action. Okay, this is potentially very good. So if you run your Croxigo in, so you do a move and a swing, so a 6-inch threat range, and you pop Brutal Blows because you're next to 2 guys, then you get up to 5 attacks, which is very good. That's almost like you were standing still and swinging twice, right? That's really good. So if you were to, that's more than that. So that's more than if you were standing still and swinging twice. And if you had a blessing, it's equal to standing still and swinging twice with a high enough double. It's a double, which is very good. Now, the downside is you never get to use your range 2. It's very, it's counterintuitive because you have your range 2. You kind of want to stay slightly further away to utilize your defensive buff of the range 2, this forces you into engagement range, which one's harder to do. Right, your actual threat range becomes smaller. Instead of being a 6-inch threat range, you have a 5-inch threat range, which is harder to work with. And you're in danger of taking more damage back because you're engaged. So it's a very interesting ability, and it does skyrocket the Croc score to very interesting, almost charge-based levels of destruction, and I very much like that. But the Warspawned gets the Spawn of Sotek, and this guy gets +2 to his attack actions if one or more of your allies is endangered. Now, this is a new mechanic, so endangered is a minion that is within 1 inch of another enemy fighter or has 1 or more damage points allocated to them, and this endangered fighter has to be within 6 inches of your Warspawned. So, all your skinks are minions. All you've got to do is have an injured skink, or have a skink somewhere on the board near enough to your Warspawned, and that's it. Then your Warspawn becomes a 5/5/3/6. Because it also, unlike Brutal Blows, Spawn of Sotek works on both attack actions, not just the next one. So he does just become a 5/5/3/6, which makes the Warspawned incredible. You don't need to be within 1 inch. It's got an easier to fulfill requirement than I think Brutal Blows does. It's still a double, and the effect is more powerful. It's a bit harder to set up, maybe because you have to have something endangered, but once it's set up, you are really good to go here, and the Warspawn just skyrockets into just Pound Town, right? 5/5/3/6 is a wonderful profile. If you have to, give them +1 strength maybe, and you're good to go. It's super, super cool, but both of them are very much worth using. I'm a massive fan of these guys. These are going to be a defining feature of Seraphon, I think, which is great because their models are also wonderful. Importantly to note as well, neither are heroes, so they are very much locked into Seraphon. You cannot ally them in any way, shape, or form, which I think is also healthy for the game, because the elusive 4/8 profile is elusive in order for a reason, and this does just lock that down. If this could be allied in, similar to if you could ally in Star Soulmates Paladins, you would see these guys in every single order list, and now you can't, and that's always a good thing. It helps keep the Seraphon very much unique. Their other abilities, so Predatory Leap is for your Agrodons. This allows them to make a bonus move action of 3 inches and then do up to 3 inches worth of damage to a target within 1 inch. That's kind of cool. So it's a weird mix of 2 different kinds of abilities, but it's also worse than both of those abilities separately. I don't know if this is actually good though. It does give you fly, which means you can just jump over terrain, which is actually very interesting, but I don't know. It's quite expensive for a 3-inch move and maybe 3 damage, right? It's a triple is very hard. It's hard to justify triples a lot of the time. Because you kind of want to make them into quads, right? And doubles are pretty good, so is it worth bumping a wild dice into this from a double to a triple, or starving yourself of a quad to get 3 damage? Probably not, right? Questionable. Now, Raptidon Tactics is very cool. So basically, this has 2 variants built into it. So the ranged attack version of this, so the Raptidons with the blowpipes, the Hunters, they basically can make a bonus move, which is cool. So they're faster, which is better for getting onto objectives. And the melee version, the Chargers, they gain +2 to their attacks. They gain +2 to their attacks characteristic until the end of the activation, which is okay. It brings them in, makes them into a 6 attack Andy. But if you look at their stats though, 1/3 damage, strength 3, that ain't great. Even with 6 attacks, that's not good. But as a double, Raptidon Tactics on your Hunter variants, the ranged variants, is very good and plays into how I would run them, which is treasure grabbers, objective contesters on turn 1, fast moving, annoying things. Raptidon Tactics fits that perfectly, and I like it a lot in that instance. And it further reinforces why I don't like the melee version, sadly, but it is what it is. Now, moving on to the Agents of Chaos and their myriad of changes. Split now works. Good to see. There was a weird rune mark issue with it before. It's now gone. You'll love to see it. I think everyone more or less ran it as it was intended to be anyway. So I don't think it'll actually have much of an impact on how people play Tzeentch Demons, but it's nice to see regardless, right? We also gain the Rotbringers, the Mortals of Nurgle, gain a new laddie called the Harbinger of Decay with Doombell. And for 150 points, he's a fairly durable platform with toughness 4 and 25 wounds, and a 3-3-2-4 profile, which is pretty weak, to be fair. However, he's moving 6, which is quite fast for Nurgle, and he has a very interesting quad, possibly one of the most potentially impactful quads we have in the game. But because you would never build around a quad, I don't think the Harbinger will actually see much play, even though this quad is incredible. Until the end of the battle round, enemy fighters cannot use reactions or abilities while they are within 7 inches of this fighter. That's a massive bubble. The Harbinger is not a small model, he's a big old mounted lad, I think. So this guy is a fairly big model with a ginormous range. He just shuts everything down until the end of the turn. So if you go first and pop this quad, you're done. Even the quad 1 has no dice value requirement. It's just a flat 7 and your enemy can't use abilities. Potentially game-changingly powerful. This could win games. It's that good. It's a quad though. You would never build around this. You would never rely on this at all. And he's a little bit too expensive, and his impact elsewhere is so minor with his 3-3-2-4. I just don't see him being all that good, despite his durability, right? The speed and the durability is fine. If he was a little bit better in combat, I could see him be used as how I would use those Agrodons, right? Throw him into a deployment zone and just get to smacking things and being a bit of a tank, right? As it stands, he doesn't really fill that role as well as I would like. So maybe that ability is very, very powerful. It's a maybe from me. I think the ability, the toll of the Doombell is so fun. We might see him appear as a extreme tech piece, maybe. He's very cool. I like the design space, even though I don't like the overall result, right? Now, what I do really enjoy, this is my favorite model in the whole game, as of right now, is the Lord of Hubris. This guy is wonderful. For 155 points, he is dead on where you would expect his he would be for a Slaanesh mortal hero. He's the same price as a Myrmidesh Painmaster, I believe that's what they're called, and he's roughly the same stats. He's a bit worse in some areas, a little bit better in other areas, which is great. 4-4-2-3 is an okay profile, lots of attacks, decent strength, a pretty okay damage line, very tight, but it's not fantastic. Movement 5 is wonderful. Toughness 4 is fantastically average, and 20 wounds is what you would expect for this price point. Where he becomes truly disgustingly wonderful is with his ability. This is my favorite ability in the whole game. It is called You First, I Insist. You pick an enemy fighter within 1 inch of this fighter. That enemy fighter makes a bonus attack action targeting this fighter. Until the end of this fighter's activation, you add +2 strength, +2 attack, and +3 crits to the end of the activation. So if you're stationary and you do this, you're getting 12 attacks, strength 6, 2-6 damage, which is outstanding. That's such a fun profile, such a thematic ability. You might die, but if you don't, you're probably going to destroy the thing that dared to strike you. So how I would run this guy is I would put on +1 damage. So +1 damage on this guy is it's only 25 points of an increase. He goes to 180 points. He then becomes, when buffed, a 6-6-3-6 profile. And that is very deadly. Even a 4-4-3-3 is pretty darn deadly. He's there to kill chaff. He can swing up to like mid-rangey, titany things. You'll see there's a lot of toughness, like high wounds, toughness 5 things coming in with this update. This guy will cleave through them, like using head maths. With 12 attacks, I think you're looking at something like 30-ish damage with a 12-6-3-6 profile. That's killing most things. as long as you survive the initial hit, and with 20 wounds, you're likely to survive that initial hit, right? Now, the risk is, as the game goes on, the load of hubris becomes riskier and riskier to use, and this is wonderful as a fun interaction, because every time you use You First, I Insist, you are one step closer to just wasting your dice and being dead. And of course, your opponent can still just counter. So you're taking the You First, I Insist damage, and you're taking counter damage potentially. He dies. He will die nearly every single game, but he will blend through everything until he dies. He is so much fun, and he is now he's a staple in my Slaanesh lists. I love this guy because he's just so darn fun. There's even some sneaky play with Skaven. If you ally in Skaven, this guy into a Skaven list, the bodyguard ability makes You First, I Insist much better because they can't target you. That's it. It locks it down. So you gain all the benefits of You First, I Insist, and you don't get hit. So yeah, combo this with Skaven, you're good to go. All for that. Other things that have changed is Corvus Cabal have had a nice quality of life change. So now their terrain jumping is no longer 3 inches, which is incredibly awkward on Warcry terrain, because a lot of Warcry terrain's actually like slightly below 3 inches. When measured, they're slightly below. So it was surprisingly difficult to have the swooping attack and death from above work. 2 inches now actually covers nearly every single piece of Warcry terrain, apart from the really small platforms. So these are using their abilities much easier. They still have to start on the elevated platform to gain the secondary benefit of their ability, but they at least have that ease of being able to use it at all, which is a much needed change that I am all for. And there's actually another change to Corvus we'll see later on that I really think gives Corvus Cabal this second wind in Warcry, and they could be one of the most interesting like dark horse tales of this update, but we'll get to that in a bit. Now, Cypher Lords have also had a big change. Now, these are my two go-to factions. Having both these buffed I'm a huge fan of both of these. Shadowy Recall has had a massive change, huge. It's much bigger than you might think initially, because it just reads like a standard teleport. It's not entirely clear what's actually changed, but a lot has changed. So we'll break it down. So instead of just picking Cypher Lord minions, you now pick any minion, which is awesome. There is now no range to it. It used to be 12 inches. You can pick any minion on the board with it, and that's it. So no Cypher Lord restriction, no range restriction. You then place them within 6 inches. This used to be wholly within, not just anywhere within, and it used to be within the dice value. So if you had a 111, you could never use Shadowy Recall because you could never fit your guy wholly in that bubble. Oh no. So now Shadowy Recall is pulling things from anywhere. They're pulling things out of faction potentially, and you're placing them further in more, placing them with less restrictions on the placement, which is a lot of changes to one rule that makes the Cypher Lords only slightly better, sadly. It's still not fantastic, but what it does do, it allows other factions to ally in the Thrallmaster if they have minions, and allow you to use Shadowy Recall out of faction. It makes the Thrallmaster this potentially interesting teleport ally, which is awesome. I don't think Chaos has any other teleport tricks that works outside of rune marks. I think Kagra has one that works only on her warband. Ephelim has one only on his warband. Cypher Lords could potentially teleport other minions. I can't think of any minions off the top of my head though. There might not be many, but that's worth looking into for sure. Really positive change. It's a nice quality of life change again for Cypher Lords. And then there's more for Chaos. Slaves to Darkness have lost the Exalted Champion, they have lost the Chaos Chosen, and they have gained the Chaos Chosen Exalted Champion, and they've gained Chaos Chosen again, but with new stats. Sadly, the Chaos Chosen with Exalted Champion is not great. sadly. The guy is 210 points. His stats are fine. Like 4, 5, 3, 4 is actually a nice profile. Toughness 5, 24 wounds is a good defensive line. He's not bad. But compared to just basic ass Chosen, they lose 1 attack and they lose 4 wounds, but they're also 55 points cheaper. Give them +1 attack for like 20 points and you've basically got the same thing. You do lose some of the abilities. You do lose out on the hero abilities and stuff, so that is a bit of a downside potentially. But honestly, the Exalted Champion does just feel a little bit undercooked, whilst the Chaos Chosen actually feel kind of interesting. 20 wounds, toughness 5, they're nice and burly, movement 4, nice and speedy. Strength 5 is always nice, and a nice tight 3-4 profile. I'm all for this stuff, right? I'm all for tight profiles like this. With the change to chaff, which we'll see later on, with a lot of chaff becoming more expensive, mid-range indirectly gains a bit of a bump in efficiency by proximity or proxy, right? So Chaos Chosen are actually pretty cool, and these are, I think, undeniably better than what they used to be. Will they see play? Maybe. Definitely, I think they're interesting enough. They're still kind of just bland chaos things. Slaves of Darkness has a fair few just kind of bland chaos things, and these are still just kind of bland. But the stats are pretty good. Now the Therodons and the leaders, the Thoracons, are really good additions to Slaves of Darkness. Therodons in particular, I am a big fan of because they are cheap. That's the name of the game here. Cheap. And their stats are fantastic. The Falchion Lad, 195 for 4524, toughness 6, movement 5, 28 wounds, dodges the Grimhold Exile. Fantastic. He's a big old burly anchor. I'm all for that. His damage is a little bit low, but he's got a lot of attacks at high strength. Really cool. And they all have access to this Unleashed Savagery, which I'll touch on in a little bit. The Great Axe is also very nice. This guy in particular, the 3-5, 3-6 profile on the basic Therodon is wonderful. The Thoracon with the Great Axe though, 55 points more expensive for +1 attack and nothing else. Just take a Therodon and give them +1 attack for 30 points. Save yourself 25 points. Again, you lose the leader stuff. That might be impactful, but for pure points efficiency, the Therodon with +1 attack to be 4, 5, 3, 6 is wonderful for 250. I'm actually a big fan of that, especially when we look at other changes within the faction. He's a very fun profile. And then the Thoracon with the Falchion and Shield really shows that there is some value in this hero rune mark, okay? And how effective this guy is potentially, the basic Therodon is, as a stat block. Because for 15 points, you gain nothing on the Thoracon. You gain no attacks, no strength, no damage, no wounds, nothing. He's identical stat line. But he has the hero rune mark, which makes him allyable, and it gives him hero abilities, which may or may not be worth those 15 points. So yeah, hero rune marks definitely carry some point weight, and this Therodon Thoracon comparison really shows that. So that's kind of interesting. But before we really dive into them, I think Unleashed Savagery is such a wonderfully thematic ability for a double. So each fighter can only use this once per battle. You roll a number of dice equal to the value of the double, and then for every 4+, gain +1 strength, +1 attacks on your next melee attack action. You gain +1 to that roll if there's a friendly Ogroid Myrmidon within 6 inches. Ogroid lists exist. Throw in Ogroid Myrmidon with some Thorodons and Therodons, you've got a really cool thematic list, and they actually buff each other wonderfully. This Unleashed Savagery, giving them, like, potentially, let's, you know, with a 3+, let's see if you run 6 dice on a 3+, you're looking at 4 hits. Like, this Axe Laddie, he goes to 7-9-3-6. This guy's cleaving the sun, right? If he's buffed with +1 attack, he gets even more. Like, it's kind of wild. Even these low damaged Falchion ones just kick right off. And remember, the Myrmidon is also a very potent piece. And the Myrmidon has access to abilities that allow these guys to attack again. So Yeah, these Theodons combined with a Myrmidon could have some really interesting play, and this is one of the few examples in Warcry where you have a once per battle ability, which is really funky, and it's a very strong ability for a double, incredibly strong. So I can see Theodons being a very fun pick, either as a brawly, burly anchor within Slaves of Darkness, or as an interesting side piece, like this guy here for 210. The Thoricon with Falchion and Shield, he is really funky as just a burly anchor. I would take him just for his raw stats. Screw everything else. Combined with something like a Vexmore maybe, having a bunch of toughness 6 lads on the cheap. All for that, right? Or just running a full Ogroid list, which is now a thing you can do. Throw in a Thaumaturge, throw in a Myrmidon, throw in a few Theodons, boom, you're good to go. It'll be a fun list, you have a great time. Going on to death. Nighthaunt have had a massive buff, huge buff. So now their Frightful Touch ability, which is the thing that turns hits into crits, now works on everyone. The whole warband has it, not just destroyers, which is really, really good. They now have damage. Nighthaunt now just do damage, and it's a reliable-ish damage. Very, very cool. And they even buff destroyers. So if they had, the old things that used this ability now get +1 attack when they do this ability to both their attack actions, so they're even more deadly than they used to be. Beautiful. Fantastic change. Nighthaunt, with this one change, could actually become fairly viable in the competitive space, and definitely worth looking at. And with other changes we will look at later on, Nighthaunt are definitely geared up to be one of the big winners of this update. But so are Ossiarch Bone Reapers. Now we'll see they've taken hits elsewhere, but this edition is really fun. So a big weakness of Ossiarch is their terrible hero choices. They're all bad. You just take a Hecatos and ignore everything else, and you live your life, like, you know, like without any thought. The Mortisan Ossifector is really fun. Stat line is fine. For 140 points, this is a fine stat line. Nothing else to say on that. His double is really funny though. It's such a good ability. You pick a friendly Ossiarch Bone Reaper with fly within 3 inches. Until the end of the battle round, add half the value of this ability to attacks of their next melee attack action. You are targeting currently exclusively Morast, Harbingers, and Archives. These guys are your dragons. They are high damage, high strength, middling attack things that you launch into your opponent's backline to slaughter all their support pieces, all their chaff, all their range stuff. They're very good at doing that. They even have a free move built into their stuff with their triple. The Mortisan Ossifector makes them even better, giving them a bonus up to 3 attacks, and then allowing them to move for free on a triple, I believe. These guys, they move 10 for free, and then they just swing in with like 9 attacks overall. They're killing most things. This is a wonderful change. He is very much a one-off thing though, because you're going to wind up your Morast and go and slap his ass, zoom, he flies off and he just kills a guy. But now you're out of range probably for the rest of the game because he's quite slow compared to the flying Morast stuff. But he's still a decent wizard, and that wizard profile should never be underestimated. This thing starts to spike, you're going to start removing models. So very interesting addition. I can see the Mortisan replacing the Hecatos in so many lists. I can actually see the already popular Morast stuff becoming even more popular and finally putting a nail in the coffin of those Stalkers, who are also very good, but do not gain this benefit. Destruction have also received things, because there's even more things to talk about. Rabble Rouser, I'm going to rapid fire these ones though. Rabble Rouser is a okay goblin profile. He shuts down monsters of all things. He is basically a net for monsters within 6 inches. So what will happen here? The monster will just kill you, but you're delaying them stuff, right? It's a very strange tech piece. If monsters ever become overwhelming in Warcry, the Rabble Rouser could actually see play, and it'll be really fun to see. So yeah, big fan of that as a thing that exists. The Squig boss with Nasha Squig is also kind of fine stat line wise for a goblin and price. His ability is another double called the Mycophile's Pouch. It basically buffs your flying things and your beasts, which I believe are just your squigs. So other squigs within 1 inch are gaining +1 attack. Within 6 inches. That's a big bubble on a double for +1 attack, which is normally a triple for the record. That's a big deal, but it only targets beasts and flying things. So if you have a love for squigs, boom, the squig boss on Nasha Squig is now an official combo piece for your squigs. Enjoy, love your life. I will definitely be trying this guy out in the future. My favorite additions here though are the potentially overlooked Snarlfang Riders, specifically the Snarlfang Rider Git boss, because they are fast, they are not mounted, big deal there, because they means they ignore terrain to a degree. Toughness 4 makes them fairly durable, 20 wounds is fairly durable. Okay melee, right? 3, 5, 2, 4 on a goblin, I'm okay with that. Their range attack, 2, 4, 2, 3. Lovely profile on that Git boss. The rider is just as good in melee, but has a slightly worse range attack because it's only got strength 3 and less wounds. I'm a big fan of these guys. For one, their stats are really fun, but their ability is really fun too, called Cant Catch Us. It's a double. A fighter can only do this if they've made 1 or more range attack actions to activation. This fighter then makes a bonus move action equal to the number of inches of this ability. So this is like a hit and run. You fire your bow and you run away. Or you fire your bow, move towards a new target, and you fire your bow. It's all kinds of things you can do with this, and it's such a wonderfully thematic ability, which has been a thing I've noticed in a lot of these editions, is that they've got such a wide variety of new ability types. I don't think we actually have a hit and run ability like this in Warcry right now. We do now. Big fan. I'm not going to say I'll always take a Snarlfang Rider Git boss, but I'd be very tempted to take them because I love that ability, I love that range attack. I would give him +1 strength. I don't even care. Give him +1 strength and just chip away at things. It'll be fun. You'll never catch him. He's way too fast, and that ability makes him really hard to deal with. And again, movement 10, decent durability. Heimer objectives, take treasures. Very cool utility piece. Big fan. Ogres have new things too. The Blood Pelt Hunter is really good. In melee, 3535 is great. At range, 2635 is great. Movement 5, toughness 4, 30 wounds is pretty darn good. 280 points is a steal, frankly. This lass is very much like Hrothgorn, but worse at shooting, but better in melee and with less wounds, but also a bit cheaper. She's a wonderful accompaniment or even a replacement because her range attack's still very good. She's also completely independent. So ogres can all use might makes right. So if they kill a thing, they can fire again and move again, but they don't really have a way to get bonus shots without killing things without external support like a Quiv. And Quiv's quite limited. This lass, different story. She has Haul 'em in. So she gets a bonus attack action, which includes range attacks, and then you yank them towards you. So how this works is you might say, shoot them with this bonus attack action, impale them, yank them into melee, and then smash them with your pretty darn good melee profile another 2 times. It's good stuff. Just a really cool utility piece. Obviously, pulls have all kinds of utility for objective play and all kinds of, like, pulling them into tyrants or into gut lords, all kinds of funky things. So there's a lot of play with this as a pull and a lot of damage potential as just a damage ability. You could just stand still and fire your shot, like fire 6 times, and you're having a good time with that, right? Super cool ability, super cool addition. I can see the Blood Pelt Hunter being almost a surefire pick in a lot of lists, potentially replacing Hrothgorn entirely, despite losing damage and a little bit of range, I believe. So that's a really unexpected addition here to Warcry. I'm a big fan of it though, really cool. Now we've got some more designer commentary to help tidy up the rules a bit. We're going to quickly go through these. So Dispossessed, Over My Dead Body, has been very contentious because it's really powerful. It's one of those abilities that has had contention, not because it's ambiguous, so to speak, it's because it feels so oppressively powerful. Surely it doesn't work how we're playing it. you're wrong. Simply put. Yeah, so Over My Dead Body, you always count as 3 models when you use it. So if you use it, you count as 3 models, and it does stack. So you can count as 5 if you used it twice on one objective. So yeah, Over My Dead Body is just as disgustingly powerful as we always thought it was going to be. So that's just really funny. I really enjoyed that. So Dispossessed have a very clear place within this objective holding like archetype, and they do it better than almost anything else. And we'll see why when we look at how chaff has changed in Warcry in a little bit. I keep saying this, we're getting there. We have a bit of confirmation on the Screamer Zinch's Latching Bite. It basically confirms that you have to, the target of the actual net effect is the thing you attacked, and you also have to attack to get the net effect. So again, a bit of clarification on something that was somewhat ambiguously worded. That's all being cleared up now. So Latching Bite is all good to go. We've got a little bit of some Crypt of Blood stuff, which is just, that's not really important. But we do have a change to the Gore Chosen of Drom. And this is a wonderful change because now you can use Overhead Smash on the Gore Hulk. This was completely, rules as written, illegal to use since its release months and months ago, because it required you to fall on your turn to do it. You can't fall on your turn. If you look at the rules of Warcry, the wording is very specific and you don't fall. So, oh no, now you just have to move vertically down. And it's even been buffed. It used to be 3 inches like Corvus Cabal. It's now 2 inches. So they've given it the Corvus Cabal treatment too. So now the Gore Hulk is not only better because its ability has been buffed, its ability also works. So now there's very few reasons not to bring a Gore Hulk if you're looking for this sort of like mid-priced Titan, because the Gore Hulk is really, really good already, but he now works. So hey, he's even better. Love to see that. Sons of Vmon have been brought into line finally. They forgot to add delete rune mark very clearly to the Sons of Vmon stuff. They now have that rune mark, so they are now nerfed. Their resurrection has been nerfed. This will pull them right back into line with the rest of the Soulblight Gravelord. I am all for this finally being changed. Sons of Vmon are still good, but they're now in line. They're not stupid. Now you get to the meat. So you might have thought all of this stuff before was the meat. This is the meat. This is where all the magic happens. There's a lot of changes to points, and I will try to be as quick as possible. K-Knight Shadow Stalkers. Reductions almost across the board. All their mid-range stuff almost has been reduced in price, which is fantastic. Their chaff is cheaper. Their repeater crossbow warlocks are cheaper. Their mid-range melee things are also now cheaper. This will allow you to take more blessings. It allows you to squeeze in more models. Nice little quality of life change to the K-Knight Shadow Stalkers, who in every other case haven't received anything else. These points reductions are very nice on a very underused and underpowered faction. Will this make them competitive? Maybe. Who knows? I don't think it's enough, but it's still nice. It'll make them better overall. The Caradon Overlords have universally been shafted here though. So we've already talked about how Fight for Profit's been nerfed. Everything else that's good has also been nerfed to bring them in line. The Aranot Company privateers with pistols have had a 5-point increase, and this is arguably the biggest impact of to Caradon, because their chaff spam was their biggest strength. You might think, the mortars or the aether cannons or Fight for Profit was the actual strength. No, that's all a lie. It's all a lie spread by the Caradon Overlord players to distract you from their real strength, which is their incredibly good value chaff. Now, you might think 5 points is a small increase, and it is, but over the course of a list, right, you are seeing potentially 10 cutters in a list at a time. That's a 50-point increase to your list. You have to find those points somewhere. You're going to lose a model on just paying for your basic chaff now. That's a big change. Losing a model is a massive impact to your list in Warcry, right? It's a huge change. But then we have more changes. Aether cannons plus 20 points. this makes them much harder to bring because of Fight for Profit being nerfed as well. You're only really getting one shot off at a time, maybe two once you get set up on turn 2, okay? So they're not getting like 6 shots a turn, they're getting maybe 4 from turn 2, probably only 1 shot turn 1. These are very expensive now for their incredible damage output, but they've been reined back in. So obviously this makes mortars better. You just take mortars. They don't require Fight for Profit to be good. Oh no, they've been nerfed too. Plus 15 points. This really to me shows that Games Workshop are actually paying attention to what they're doing here. Nerfing the Aether Cannon would have just put everybody into the mortar camp. They preemptively nerfed the mortar to help stymie the flow of mortar spam, and this is great to see. And I still think the mortar will be taking over the Aether Cannon now, but it's still a nice change, especially when it's a substantial 15 points, and then the Admiral's got a 10-point upgrade points bump as well. So overall, you might actually see Caradon Overlords dropping 2 models with these changes, 2 whole models in their standard lists, and that's a big change. That's a huge nerf. Like, rules changes aside, losing 2 models in a warband is ginormous and healthy because Caradon were oppressively good. This should hopefully bring them in line, and we might see some interesting changes in how they build their lists, maybe go more for melee based, maybe move away from chaff spam. We'll see. It opens up new play opportunities, even though it is universally negative for those players. We'll see how they adapt and move forward and how they fit within that meta. So Thunderstrike, the Prime with Shield and Hammer, the Grand Hammer Basic Annihilator, and the Shielded Annihilator have all went up 10 points. This is a clear targeted strike at Thick Boy Cardio. This is a very popular list in Stormcast, and they have precision hit that list to shut them down. That list is probably unbuildable now. You're having a 50, possibly 60 point increase to your list. Good luck finding that and still bringing the same list to the same effect, to the same efficacy. It's just not going to happen. Is that good for the game? Probably. Again, it'll give Stormcast a excuse to maybe build more varied lists. It also helps shake up the meta. I'm all for this. Interestingly enough, they did not target the Annihilator Prime with Grand Hammer, who is 200 points base, which is interesting, and that could be because he is a common ally in a lot of lower tiered order warbands, so they maybe wanted to avoid hitting down too much and impacting the weaker order warbands by nerfing everything good, but they have nerfed some key pieces in some very powerful lists. They've also came in and nerfed the Retributor Prime, who's also very popular, and Paladins with Star Soul Mace, who are and were and are still one of the most effective models in the game for their raw stats and damage output. So these guys have just been tweaked a little bit to make them more expensive. Again, plus 10 points. You'll see the Star Soul Mace spam will take a big hit here because they've got to, again, find 20, 30, 40 points to do their list. So it's a big change there. On the plus side, Seraphon have actually seen a reduction in a lot of places. So their skinks are now just cheaper. 65 points is a very nice stat line. Remember, everything or all the troublesome chaff in the game are now more expensive. We'll see this later on as well. They're a lot more expensive in some cases. 65 point chaff is now a much more enticing price point by comparison, right? All these things, this is a direct buff to skinks, but there's also indirect buffs because everything else is more expensive, so that gap closes even more. So this is a really positive change for Seraphon. Their super cheap chaff is now very cheap compared to everything else. Kixi Taka has seen a price increase, which is interesting because Kixi Taka is a fairly popular pick, so probably just to balance that out a little bit, make it a bit more expensive. But the Hunters of Hawanshi, they've got a massive nerf on their reaction, but they've got a ginormous buff to their points. I mean, minus 10 points, minus 10 points, minus 10 points, minus 5, minus 5. These guys are, their cheapest model now is 60 points. That is disgustingly cheap. Like, Skink Dart Pipe Spam could actually be a list that works. You can easily take 15 Hunters of Hawanchi models and still have plenty of room for allies, right? This is incredibly cheap for movement 6 models. These are very, very fast. They can ignore terrain. Their range attack isn't great, to be fair. But with 14, 13 blowpipes firing at you, you're going to get crits off eventually, and it's only 2 damage, but enough blowpipes will kill things. So, you know, really interesting. They've now become a potential replacement or side piece to your Huanchi's Claws, who were the go-to thing before. But everything else is also much more viable. The Hornblower is more viable. You might even start taking the Terror Wings because the Hornblower is much cheaper now. The Alpha with Dart Pipe is cheaper now, so you have less of a tax to pay. Big changes. Hunters of Huanchi, at first glance, might have seemed to have been completely removed from the meta because their main gimmick was killed or drastically weakened. These price cuts might actually make them better than they were before, which is wild. So we might see off-meta musings running Hunters of Huanchi again in their new form and destroying the meta even more. We'll see what he comes up with that. Moving on to Chaos though, big changes. Crushers and Myrmidons at plus 10 points is huge. You might think plus 10 points is not that big, but let me riddle you this, Batman. The difference between a Crusher and a Myrmidon is 5 points. Why do you not see Myrmidons? Because that 5 points came up all the time, right? The 265 point Myrmidon nearly always struggled to fit into a list as smoothly as the Crusher because that tiny 5 point difference nearly always came up. Well, let's increase them both by 10. Good luck. You are going to struggle to fit the Thumb Red Crusher in and the Myrmidon in with their usual blessings. This is a big change, and you might think this makes all the weaker Chaos Warbands worse, and you could have been right had they not thought ahead. We'll get to that in a second. But this change definitely is targeted at the stronger Chaos Warbands to rein them in. That 10 points, again, might seem minor. It is pretty darn substantial, I think. The Arcanites of Tzeentch have gotten a pretty big buff. All of their really bad human stuff is now 20 points cheaper or 15 points on the this Cursed Blade laddie. That's a huge reduction in price across the board, which is great because these were all disgustingly overpriced. We could see Arcanites 75 points is solid for these stat lines as well. So we could see these Volcarks and these Kyric Acolytes come in as a more usable thing. How bizarre. Previously completely unplayable has now become entirely playable. Sadly, the Nurgle Demons has not had the same love. They've been hit hard. So their biggest issue within the game is Plague Bearers and Nurglings being incredibly points effective. Plus 10 points is a huge nerf. Massive. Catastrophic potentially. You're looking at potentially losing 2 models just to pay for your Plague Bearers. That's how big that is. Again, Plague Bearer lists were always big lists. We're talking like 9 with multiple Titans or like 12, 13, 14 sized model like warbands, right? That's between 70 points up all the way to maybe even like 120 points based on the list you are running worth of increases to your warband. That is a ginormous increase. That's 2 models minimum to run the list you're running before, a comparable list. This brings them straight into line with nearly every other Chaos faction. I'm not going to go much more into that, but that's a huge change to one of the more underplayed warbands that were always obviously incredibly powerful and just waiting to gain popularity. This seems like a preemptive strike on a warband that is primed to take over the meta in a way that they just hadn't yet, despite many content creators, myself included, singing their praises endlessly. So this definitely hits them where it hurts. Corvus Cabal. Oh, minus 40 points on the Shrike Talon. This guy is incredibly cheap now, and he is so good at that price point. Holy beans. The Shrike Talon is fantastic and allows you to effortlessly take a Ephemeroid Crusher and even bless it and not even notice. There's that many points saved. The Shrike Talon is fantastic. You are nearly always taking one anyway because they were so fun to use. You are always taking a Shrike Talon in Corvus Cabal. They are fantastic. These are one of the best models in the whole warband. I would still maybe stick to one simply because of... That's the Grasscutter. I would maybe just stick to the one because their real strength comes from their triple. You aren't getting multiple triples off per turn usually, so one is where you stick at, but the price saving on that one guy is huge, plus the quality of life change to their abilities, plus the nerf to other powerful Chaos Warbands and their chaff being good as standard. I'm not saying Corvus Cabal are going to be competitive or like be A tier or like S tier, but Corvus Cabal are definitely like primed for a resurgence to bump up from like D tier to C, maybe even B, and I am really excited for that universe to exist. That Grasscutter, I swear to God, he is kicking right off. I've also moved my camera. There we go, I fixed it. So Cypher Lords have seen a small buff. So sadly, Mirror Blades are still too expensive. Even 10-point reduction, you aren't seeing any meaningful change to your lists. Why? You were never taking Mirror Blades to begin with. You still aren't. They're way too expensive still. They're still way too squishy. And 10 points isn't enough. I would maybe have been happier with a 20-point decrease, honestly. That might have made them more playable with their Mirror Blades. But 120 and 125 points a pop, they're still dreadful value. I would likely not take them at all still, which is really, really sad. Even more so since they've gained that buff to their teleport. Had these had a bigger price drop, I'd have been much, much happier with the Cypher Lords going forward. I don't think they've received enough changes in faction to really change where they're going to be, sadly. Tarantulas Brood though. Their biggest weakness, in my opinion, was always the Broodmaster being a massive, massive tax. Minus 20 points is massive because it allows you, again, if you wanted to take a Ephemeroid Crusher, you still can. The reduction in the Broodmaster covers the Ephemeroid Crusher. So if you had a Crusher list before, you still got a Crusher list now, and you've still got 10 points left over. Hey, good to go. So yeah, Broodmaster reduction is great. This also incidentally allows you to build a bunch of lists that I've wanted to build for a long time, but was always like 5 points or 10 points overcosted when I try to make them. I think with enough creativity, Tarantulas Brood could actually see a resurgence. And again, you might not think 20 points on one guy is going to make a big difference. This could actually make a big difference because Tarantulas Brood have good things in their list. Their Spider Swarmers are one of the cheapest things in the entire game, so you can really bulk out on Spider Swarmers, take some really funky allies, and play this fantastic control game. And of course, the Broodmaster resurrects too. There's loads of play in Tarantulas Brood, and this reduction is more significant than I think people might initially think. But we'll see how that pans out in the future. Shatterers for Horns of a Shut being plus 5 points is huge. Unlike Nurgle Demons and Caradon Overlords, it looks like they've been a little bit more cautious with the Horns of a Shut, with how they're nerfing them. The big issues in Horns is their Flamethrowers and their Shatterers. Their Flamethrowers are being incredibly good damage pieces, their Shatterers are being incredibly good value for their points. Nerfing half of their strengths and not all of them gives Games Workshop a way to potentially come in later on and then nerf a bit more, or instead of having to like go back in and potentially rebuff them to get to a level. This is like a really small surgical buff that will have ramifications. We will see a model at least drop in Horns of a Shut, and again, losing a model is ginormous. Like, newer players to Warcry might not understand the significance of going from a 9-man warband to an 8-man warband. That's a huge loss in reliability, that's a big hit to your objective play. It's a huge hit to your turn 1 potentially, right? There's a lot of things that change when you lose even one model. So this is interesting. We'll see how that pans out. Rotmire Creed received a very interesting and potentially inconsequential buff. So the Carrion Catchers are largely unplayed because bloated ones exist, and bloated ones are really, really good. And their chaff is cheap and also really, really good. So the Carrion Catchers are like between good things, and they themselves aren't bad, they're just kind of average. They're now a lot cheaper. 10 points a pop is a significant price decrease. They might actually see play now as a solid mid-range, especially the Snatcher Hook being 100 points is a nice price point to be, and their stats are pretty solid. So we might see a change in Rotmire Creed list loadouts, and that's all good. I'm all for this. The Claws of Karanak receive a 20-point reduction to the Hound of Wrath. Claws of Karanak need a lot of help, and this helps a little bit. It allows them again to take that From Red Crusher for cheap. It allows you to take the Hound of Wrath and then like buff his stats with blessings almost for free when you compare it to what they were before. Like, it's all good. I don't think this will make Claws of Karanak competitive at all, but it does help. It helps them do things they couldn't do before, so it's not bad. It's underwhelming. There's a lot of things that could have happened at Claws of Karanak to really help them out, and this is definitely one of the things I would have liked to have seen. I would have hoped to have seen a little bit more though, sadly. On to Death. Skurgan Trueblades have a very similar underwhelming buff to their Curse Blood. Like the Hound of Wrath, the Curse Blood is a really fun model with a decent stat line, but there's a lot of issues in the Skurgan Trueblades that need to be addressed, and a 10-point reduction to the Curse Blood ain't doing it. So that's a bit sad. The Nighthaunt, huge change. Oh my god, look at all this. Minus 15, minus 5, minus 20, minus 20, minus 5, minus 15. These are all the things you would see in a traditional Nighthaunt list now. Like, before the update. These are the things you saw all the time. They've hit all of them and made them all better. And buffed their damage output. Nighthaunt are now definitely, like, in the runnings for we need to experiment and see if they're actually good. They've went from almost unplayably bad, if you look at tier lists, to, oh damn, these could actually be legitimately fantastic. I am going to bundle the Ossiarch Bone Reapers and the Soulblight Gravelords into one because they're very similar and they've all received very similar nerfs. So basically, all of their chaff has become more expensive and substantially so. Ossiarch are likely going to lose one model a pop, maybe two. Soulblight are definitely losing 2 models per warband. There's a huge nerf to Skeletons and Graveguard. Are they unplayable? There's a lot of hubbub about Soulblight being like completely unplayable now. I don't think so. It brings them in line. They're less effective than they were in objective play. I do think Ossiarch Bone Reapers might actually usurp them as the premier Death Skellybob faction, simply because their dragons have become so much more powerful because of the Ossifector, so who knows. Sons of Vmon, not to be forgotten about by Games Workshop again, have received a slight bump as well to match the Graveguard bump in the Soulblight. These are all good stuff. So far, the nerfs have been very good, super targeted, super focused on the problem areas of Warcry, and this is basically all slow moving through chaff is being hit very, very hard. Now the final page, page 17, we're finally there. Destruction, the final ramble on Destruction. Brugit nerfed, plus 20 points. Screw Brugit. I play Destruction. I love Brugit. Dude was way too good. Dude has been slapped hard. Again, finding 20 points, that's hard to do. Prog the Netter plus 15 points. He's now brought in line. He was basically an underpriced Netter. He is now a solidly priced Netter instead. Iron Jaws slapped down. The big things here are their brute bosses have been clapped with a plus 10 point increase. These are very common picks for allies in Destruction Soup because your Messin is so strong. You would often see a brute boss with boss chopper and a Brugit being your allies. They've both been increased in price. You now have to find maybe 30 points. More so if you're bringing chopper Ard boys. to fit your list into a thing. You're likely losing all your blessings if you're trying to run these lists before, you're losing a whole model. Huge changes to Destruction Soup. Again, targeting the key pieces, Brugit, Brute bosses, even Ardboy bosses are very, very common. Orgrimmar tribes have seen big changes too, plus 10 points to Tyrants, Gutlords and Crushers, aka the big three, aka the 3 ogres you use all the time because they are really, really, really good. They're now been nerfed by 10 points. This is a healthy change with everything else. Again, these were commonly seen with Brugit. That's 30 points. You have to find 30 points. Could be all your blessings. In an ogre list, this is likely going to lose a Noblar somewhere to pay for it, but that's still a whole model being cut. That's that chaff base being impacted. As an ally, you'll be losing something as well if you take these allies. So this is a big, big, healthy change. Interestingly enough, Games Workshop realized Hrothgorn is not actually overpriced. He's actually pretty darn solid for his 300-ish points. And his stat line in melee is really bad, and his range attack is very good, but he's also 300 points. They didn't hit Hrothgorn, despite Hrothgorn being a problem. They hit his support, which is honestly genius and way more impressive as a feat and beyond what I thought Games Workshop were capable of. As a thing they could do. They've targeted his support. They've nerfed Quiv. So it's now, if you want to take Hrothgorn, you have to spend 15 points more to take his chaff support, and that is a big, big points increase to do that. This indirectly makes the Blood Pelt Hunter much more of a tangible piece because she doesn't require a Quiv to get her bonus shot. She has Quiv's effect built into her kit as standard. So if you think about it that way, she's already cheaper than Hrothgorn by about 20 points. But she's also 60 points cheaper in addition because she doesn't need Quiv to fully maximize her output. So that's kind of interesting there. I'm a huge fan of that change as well. And that's it. This has been a really rambly video. It's probably a bit too long. I'm a huge fan of everything here. Apart from Face Me Cow has been changed, and that's a bit of an unfortunate nerf and clarification for Soul Sworn, who really didn't need to be hit. So them getting slapped is a little bit sad, honestly, but what can you do? Everything else, the meta has definitely shifted. There's going to be a huge shift. Where's it going to go? No one can tell. But the meta will change, massively change. The things that worked before will not work now. You'll have to go in and list build. The discovery process in Warcry has always been its strongest aspect. And now we will see that process kick off again on a game-wide basis. And the best part, they're looking to update Warcry regularly again. So hopefully every 6 months, I believe, if I heard correctly, as opposed to once every 2 years. So these surgical changes to the game, not massive points increases for the most part, right? It's like 5 points here, 10 points there, right? It's a small surgical little tweaks. This is good. If it was sweeping nerfs, massive, disgusting, like knee-jerk nerfs, this would have been a terrible update. As it is now, it's beautifully applied in key locations to hit the things that were an issue. And it proves Games Workshop are actually paying attention to their game and to the competitive scene. They're listening to the complaints, to the concerns, and they're making changes. But yeah, this is all fantastic. I'm a huge fan of all this. I've said this multiple times. I'm rambling like a madman. I will end it here. Thank you for watching. If you like this kind of like freeform rambly ass content, let me know. I will make more of it. If you found it disgustingly boring and abhorrent and you want me to never talk again, let me know too, and I will be sure to never speak again. Until next time, lads, ladies, and everybody in between and beyond, ta-ra.